My name is Ramona. I'm 32 years old and never thought my act of love would end with me being thrown out of my childhood home. When my parents called about losing their house, I immediately wired $20,000 from my savings to save it. I still hear my mother's scream echoing in my mind, "Get out and never come back." The most painful betrayal wasn't just losing my money, but realizing that family ties can be severed even after the deepest sacrifice. If you're watching this from somewhere you call home, hit that like button and subscribe as I share how I lost mine after trying to save it. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, where my parents Frank and Linda raised me in a modest two-story house with blue shutters and a creaky front porch swing. While we never had much in terms of material wealth, my childhood was rich with love. Dad worked at the local factory, and Mom juggled part-time jobs at the diner and as a school secretary. They struggled to make ends meet, but they never let me feel the weight of their financial burdens. As a child, I'd often find them at the kitchen table late at night, bills spread out whispering about which ones could wait another month. They didn't know I was watching from the stairs, my small heart already developing a deep sense of financial anxiety that would follow me into adulthood. "Ramona is so bright," my mom would say to relatives at family gatherings. "She's going to college and breaking this cycle." The pressure to succeed wasn't explicitly stated, but I felt it in every sacrifice they made for my education, in every extracurricular activity they somehow found money for. When I got accepted to the University of Pennsylvania, with a partial scholarship, my parents beamed with pride. The scholarship covered most of my tuition, but I still took out loans and worked two part-time jobs to cover the rest. Those years were exhausting, but formative. I majored in finance, fascinated by the power and security that financial knowledge could provide. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and landed an entry-level position at a financial advisory firm. I lived in a tiny apartment with two roommates, ate ramen noodles more often than I care to admit, and sent money home when I could. Every promotion felt like a victory, not just for me, but for my family. Within 8 years, I had climbed to a senior financial advisor position. I had my own office with a view of the Chicago skyline, a comfortable one-bedroom apartment, and enough savings to feel secure. I visited my parents every few months, always bringing gifts and helping with whatever bills seemed most pressing during my visits. Last spring, I received incredible news, a promotion to Director of Client Financial Planning, which came with a substantial salary increase and bonus structure. That weekend, I called my parents to share the good news. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, her voice oddly distant. "We're so proud of you." "Is everything okay?" I asked, detecting the strain in her voice. After a long pause, Dad took the phone. "We're facing some trouble with the bank, Ramona. We're behind on the mortgage payments." My stomach dropped. "How behind?" "They're threatening foreclosure in 60 days unless we can pay $20,000. He admitted, his voice breaking. "We didn't want to burden you with this, especially with your big news, but we're desperate." I sat down at my kitchen counter, mind racing through options. $20,000 was a significant sum, even with my new promotion. It represented most of my emergency fund, the safety net I'd worked so hard to build. "Have you looked into loan modification options, refinancing?" I asked my financial advisor, instincts kicking in. "The bank won't work with us anymore," Mom said, now on speakerphone. "We've missed too many payments and our credit scores are shot." I took a deep breath. "I can help. I'll wire the money next week." The words came out before I'd fully processed the implications. "Really?" "Oh, Ramona, we couldn't ask that of you," Mom said, though the relief in her voice was palpable. "You didn't ask, I'm offering," I replied. "But I need you both to agree to something. We need to set up a repayment plan, and I want to help you create a budget moving forward. This can't happen again." "Of course, sweetheart," Dad said quickly. "Whatever you say, we'll sign anything." We talked for another hour, discussing their income, expenses, and how they'd fallen so far behind. They promised to gather all their financial documents before my visit the following month. I ended the call feeling hopeful, and if I'm honest, a little proud that I could be their savior. That night, I created a detailed spreadsheet mapping out how my parents could repay me over 5 years with minimal interest. I researched financial literacy programs in their area and drafted a simple budget based on what I knew of their expenses. I fell asleep thinking about the look of relief that would wash over their faces when I handed them the check that would save their home. The next morning, I booked a flight to Pennsylvania, scheduled for the following month, giving me time to receive my first paycheck from the new position and prepare the financial documents. I called my parents again to confirm the arrangements. "I've booked my flight for the 15th, I told Mom. "I'll bring everything we need to sort this out properly." "You're an angel, Ramona," she said. "I don't know what we'd do without you." "We'll pay you back every penny," Dad added from the background. "Your mother and I have already been talking about cutting back on expenses." I smiled to myself, picturing them at the same kitchen table where they'd worried about money throughout my childhood, but this time with a solution in sight. "I know you will. We're family, and families support each other." As the weeks passed, my excitement grew. I imagined helping my parents achieve financial stability at last. Maybe I could even help them start saving for retirement, something I knew they'd neglected over the years. With my expertise and their commitment to change, we could transform their financial future together. The day before my flight, I called once more to confirm the wire transfer had arrived in their account. "It came through yesterday," Dad confirmed. "The bank says we're good for now. Thank you, Ramona. We can't wait to see you tomorrow." I hung up feeling like a hero, completely unaware that I was flying straight into a storm that would tear my family apart. The taxi turned onto the familiar street of my childhood, and I felt a mix of nostalgia and concern as I approached my parents' house. From the outside, it looked worse than I remembered from my Christmas visit 6 months ago. The blue paint on the shutters was peeling badly, the front lawn needed mowing, and the gutter was sagging on one side. "This is it," I told the driver, paying the fare and pulling my suitcase from the trunk. As I walked up the cracked concrete path, the front door opened, and my mother stepped out. Her smile seemed forced, not quite reaching her eyes. "Ramona, you're here." She hugged me briefly, her body tense. Come in, your father's watching TV." I followed her into the house, immediately noticing something that made me pause. In the living room sat a brand new 65-inch smart TV, a sleek entertainment center that definitely wasn't there during my last visit, and what appeared to be new leather recliners. Dad rose from one of those recliners, clicking off a baseball game. "There's my successful daughter," he said, giving me a quick hug. "How was the flight?" "Fine," I replied, still distracted by the new purchases. "I see you've done some shopping." An awkward glance passed between my parents. "Just a few updates," Mom said dismissively. The old TV finally died, and those fabric chairs were falling apart. I bit my tongue, calculating that what I was looking at probably cost at least $3,000, maybe more, money that could have gone toward their mortgage debt. "I'm going to take my bag upstairs," I said, needing a moment to compose myself. My old bedroom had been converted to a guest room years ago, stripped of most of my childhood possessions, except for a shelf of trophies and a faded bulletin board with college acceptance letters. I sat on the bed, taking deep breaths and reminding myself not to jump to conclusions. Dinner that evening was tense. Mom had prepared my favorite lasagna, but conversation was stilted. Every time I tried to bring up their financial situation, one of them would change the subject. "So I've drafted a repayment agreement," I said finally, as Mom served dessert. "It's very reasonable, 5 years with minimal interest, and we can adjust the monthly amount if needed." Dad frowned, setting down his fork. "An agreement like a contract. Ramona, we're family, not business associates." "I know, Dad, but this is a significant amount of money. It's just to protect everyone and make expectations clear." Mom shook her head disapprovingly. "I can't believe you don't trust us to pay you back without paperwork, after everything we've done for you." The guilt trip was familiar territory, but this time I refused to back down. "This isn't about trust. It's about being responsible with money, something I thought we all agreed was important." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with my parents retreating to their room early, claiming fatigue. I was left alone clearing the dishes and wondering if I'd made a mistake coming home. That night, I called my high school friend Tanya, who still lived in town. "They're acting strange," I told her, keeping my voice low. "And they've bought all this new furniture and electronics, even though they were about to lose the house." "That doesn't surprise me," Tanya sighed. "I saw your mom at the mall last week, shopping bags in hand. I just assumed things must be going better for them." After we hung up, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering other times I'd helped my parents financially. The $3,000 I'd sent when their car broke down 3 years ago. The $5,000 personal loan when Dad needed dental work not covered by insurance. The countless smaller amounts for utility bills, property taxes, and home repairs, none of which had ever been repaid. Morning brought no clarity. Mom was unusually quiet at breakfast, making passive-aggressive comments about city people and their contracts. When I tried to speak with Dad alone about creating a budget, he suddenly remembered urgent yard work that couldn't wait. By afternoon, I was seriously questioning my decision to help them when a truck pulled into the driveway. To my surprise, my younger brother Jake stepped out. We weren't close. He'd dropped out of community college and bounced between jobs and apartments for years, occasionally landing back at our parents' house when things got tough. "Well, look who's here, the golden child herself." He greeted me with a smirk, dropping a duffel bag in the hallway. "Jake." I nodded, noticing his new designer sneakers and smartwatch. "I didn't know you were visiting too." "Not visiting, staying for a while, lost my apartment again." He said this casually, as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than a pattern. Mom appeared from this kitchen, her face brightening. "Jake's going through a rough patch, but he's got a promising job lead at the brewery." I watched as she fussed over him, offering him leftovers, and asking about his drive. The contrast to my own welcome was stark and unsettling. Later that afternoon, I finally cornered Dad and insisted we go to the bank together to ensure the mortgage situation was resolved properly. After some resistance, he agreed, and we set up an appointment for the following morning. That evening, I transferred the $20,000 from my account to theirs, a knot forming in my stomach as I confirmed the transaction. Despite my misgivings, I told myself I was doing the right thing. This was my childhood home, my parents' security. Surely once the immediate crisis was averted, we could address the underlying issues. I had no idea how naive I was being, or how quickly things would unravel. The next morning, I drove my parents to First National Bank in my rental car. The loan officer, Mr. Patterson, greeted us with a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The Williams family welcome," he said, gesturing to seats across from his desk. "I understand you're here to make a payment on your mortgage." Dad nodded. "Yes, our daughter has helped us out. We're ready to bring the account current." Mr. Patterson typed something into his computer, then frowned slightly. "I see. According to our records, you're behind by $32, $467.82, including late fees and penalties." The blood drained from my face. I turned to my father. "You said it was $20,000. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that's the main mortgage. There might be some additional fees." Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Actually, there are two mortgages on the property. The primary mortgage is indeed about $20,000 in arrears, but there's also a home equity line of credit that hasn't been paid in 8 months. My mind raced. A second mortgage they never mentioned. More than $32,000 in total debt, not $20,000. The room felt suddenly airless. "I need a moment with my parents," I said tightly. Mr. Patterson nodded and stepped out of the office. As soon as the door closed, I turned to them. "A second mortgage. Were you ever going to tell me about this?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't want to burden you with the full amount. We thought if we could get current on the main mortgage, we could figure out the rest." "That's not how this works." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You can't just hide debt and expect it to disappear. Why did you take out a second mortgage in the first place?" Dad looked at the floor. "Medical bills, car repairs, helping Jake after his accident last year. It adds up." I took several deep breaths trying to think clearly. The $20,000 I'd transferred represented most of my emergency savings. I couldn't afford to more than double that amount without seriously compromising my own financial security. "I can still pay the $20,000 toward the primary mortgage," I said finally. "But you need to be completely transparent about all your debts so we can make a plan for the rest." They agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. After Mr. Patterson returned, we proceeded with applying my payment to the primary mortgage, bringing it current, but leaving the second mortgage still in arrears. The relief on my parents' faces as we left the bank was palpable, but it did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. The drive home was silent. In the bank parking lot, I had confronted them about their lack of transparency, and my father had become defensive. "We were desperate, Ramona," He'd snapped. Not everyone has the luxury of perfect financial planning like you do. My mother had dissolved into tears, murmuring about how ashamed they were to need help from their child. The guilt tactics were familiar, but this time they struck a nerve. I'd given them nearly everything I had, and they'd repaid me with lies. Back at the house, the atmosphere was increasingly tense. I retreated to my room claiming I had work emails to check, but really needing space to process what had happened. Through the thin walls, I could hear my parents talking downstairs, their voices rising occasionally. "We can't tell her about Jake's situation," my mother whispered urgently. "She'll never understand." "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Jake's voice joined in. "The guys aren't going to wait any longer." "We'll figure something out," Dad assured him. "We always do." Their voices dropped again, and I couldn't make out the rest. Jake's situation. What did that mean? I thought about his new clothes and accessories, despite supposedly being broke enough to move back home. That night at dinner, the conversation was artificially light, everyone carefully avoiding the topic of money. After we ate, I went looking for the financial documents my parents had promised to gather. In their home office, I found bank statements they had apparently forgotten to hide. Scanning through the pages, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. Regular withdrawals of $500 to $1,000 labeled simply cash, frequent transfers to Jake's account, credit card payments that barely covered the minimum due. One statement showed a $3,000 withdrawal the day after I'd wired them the mortgage money. I heard a noise and looked up to see Jake standing in the doorway, his expression darkening when he realized what I was looking at. "Snooping through their private stuff, real nice, Ramona." I held up the bank statement. "They promised to be transparent about their finances. This doesn't look like transparency to me." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Not everyone can be Little Miss Perfect with her fancy job and downtown apartment. Some of us have real problems." "Like what? Gambling debts?" The words came out before I could stop them. A suspicion formed from the irregular cash withdrawals. Jake's face flushed with anger. "You don't know anything about my life. You ran off to Chicago and left them here to struggle while you play big shot financial advisor." "I send them money regularly. I call every week. I just gave them $20,000. "Yeah, with strings attached," he sneered. "Contracts and budgets and lectures about responsibility. They don't need a financial planner, Ramona. They need a daughter who doesn't judge them for every little mistake." His words stung more than I wanted to admit. Taking out a second mortgage and hiding it isn't a little mistake. They were about to lose this house, and now they won't thanks to your precious money, so why are you still here digging through their personal records? Did you save the day just so you could lord it over them? I stood up, gathering the bank statements. "I'm trying to help them fix the underlying issues so this doesn't happen again." Jake laughed bitterly. "Always the fixer. Did it ever occur to you that not everyone wants to be fixed? That maybe they're happy with their lives just as they are? Happy they're drowning in debt. They're living their lives on their terms, not according to some spreadsheet." Jake moved toward the door. "You know what your problem is, Ramona. You think money solves everything, but it doesn't buy you the right to control other people." He left me standing there shaken and confused. That night, I barely slept, torn between anger at being lied to and guilt that perhaps Jake was right. Was I being controlling rather than helpful? Was my assistance really just a way to feel superior? By morning, I was exhausted and no closer to answers. Coming downstairs, I noticed an empty space on the living room wall, where a painting had hung, a watercolor I'd done in high school that had won a regional prize. "Mom," I called out, finding her in the kitchen. "What happened to my watercolor that was in the living room?" She busied herself with the coffee maker, not meeting my eyes. "Oh, we had to sell a few things during that rough patch before you sent the money. Just small items we thought we could live without." My chest tightened. "What else did you sell?" Her hesitation told me everything. Over the next hour, I discovered that many of my childhood possessions, trophies, yearbooks, even the jewelry set they'd given me for graduation, had been sold online or at pawn shops. "We needed the money for emergencies," Mom explained weakly. "What emergencies exactly?" I pressed. She wouldn't answer directly, but I noticed her glance toward Jake's room upstairs. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was devastating. Dad had been increasingly distant since the bank appointment, barely speaking to me at meals, and finding reasons to be out of the house. When I tried to talk to him about creating a financial plan, he brushed me off with vague promises to look at it later. That afternoon, I called my boss and asked for an extension on my time off, explaining that the family situation was more complicated than I'd anticipated. She was understanding, but reminded me of upcoming client meetings I couldn't miss. Take another week if you need it, Ramona, but we'll need you back by the 15th at the latest. I hung up feeling the weight of competing responsibilities, my career, which I'd worked so hard to build, and my family, who seemed to be sinking deeper into a mess I wasn't sure I could fix. 5 days into my visit, I decided it was time for decisive action. I spent an entire day creating a comprehensive financial recovery plan for my parents while they were out running errands. My plan included a strict budget debt repayment strategy and steps to improve their credit scores over time. I even researched local financial counseling services they could attend for ongoing support. That evening, I arranged a family dinner and asked everyone to stay at the table afterward so I could present my plan. Initially, the atmosphere seemed positive. Mom made her special pot roast, Dad opened a bottle of wine, and even Jake seemed less hostile than usual. I know things have been tense, I began after dinner, spreading my carefully prepared documents on the cleared table. But I really want to help you get back on solid financial ground. Dad nodded, seeming genuinely interested, as I walked them through the budget I'd created based on their actual income and expenses. Mom asked a few clarifying questions about the debt snowball method I was proposing. For the first time since arriving, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might be able to work together. Then Jake walked in 45 minutes late for dinner and visibly agitated. He grabbed a plate, filled it with leftovers, and stood leaning against the counter watching my presentation with narrowed eyes. "So basically you want them to live like monks for the next 5 years to pay off their debt?" he asked sarcastically after I explained the budget cuts I was suggesting. "Not like monks," I countered calmly. "Just more mindfully. If they follow this plan, they could be debt-free except for the mortgage within 3 years." Jake snorted. "And meanwhile, you're the puppet master holding the purse strings, right?" I felt my face flush. "That's not fair. I'm trying to help." "Help?" Jake set his plate down with a clatter. "Is that what you told them about your grand plan to make them sell this house?" My parents' heads snapped toward me in unison. "What?" Mom gasped. "I never said anything about selling the house," I protested, genuinely confused. Jake crossed his arms. "Really? Because you told me yesterday that if they can't afford to maintain this place, they should consider downsizing to something more manageable, like an apartment." I remembered our conversation in the driveway earlier that day when Jake had asked about my financial plan. I had mentioned downsizing as one of many potential options if their income couldn't support the current house long term, but it wasn't at all what I was recommending in my actual plan. "That's completely taken out of context." I tried to explain, but I could see the damage was already done. Mom's face had hardened, and Dad was looking at my financial documents with newfound suspicion. "Is that true, Ramona?" Dad asked quietly. "Do you think we should sell our home?" "No, not unless you want to." I mentioned it to Jake as one theoretical option among many, but it's not part of my recommendation at all. I flipped through my papers frantically. "Look right here. My plan is built around keeping you in this house and making it affordable." But Mom was already shaking her head, her expression shifting from interested to betrayed. "First contracts, now this. I'm starting to wonder what your real motives are." "My motive is helping you be financially secure." My voice rose in frustration. "You called me crying about losing this house. I gave you $20,000 to save it. Why would I then turn around and try to make you sell it?" Jake set his plate in the sink with deliberate slowness. "Maybe because controlling people always want to be the hero. First you swoop in with money, then you dictate how they should live, and when they don't follow your perfect plan, you'll threaten to cut them off." "That's absurd," I sputtered. "I've never threatened anything like that." Mom was now staring at me as if seeing a stranger. "You've changed, Ramona. All these years in the city dealing with money and wealthy clients. You've forgotten what family really means." The conversation was spiraling out of control. I tried to redirect, pointing to specific parts of my plan that were designed to help them keep their home long term, but Jake wasn't finished. "Oh, by the way," he announced, "I need about $5,000 for an investment opportunity. It's a sure thing 20% return within 6 months." I stared at him incredulously. You can't be serious right now. Actually, Dad cleared his throat, not meeting my eyes. Your mother and I have discussed it, and we think it's a good opportunity. We're going to help Jake with this investment. With what money? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Please tell me you're not planning to use the mortgage money I just gave you. Mom straightened in her chair. It's our money now, Ramona. You gave it to us to use as we see fit. I gave it to you to save your house, I was nearly shouting now, not to fund Jake's get-rich-quick schemes. It's not a scheme, Jake protested. It's a legitimate opportunity with my friend's startup. What startup? What does it even do? I demanded. Jake glanced at our parents, then back to me. It's complicated, tech stuff. He doesn't have to explain it to you, Mom said defensively. We trust Jake's judgment. I laughed incredulously. Trust his judgment. He's lived in 5 different apartments in 3 years and keeps moving back home because he can't pay his bills. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Jake's face darkened with rage, and Mom gasped as if I'd slapped her. How dare you speak about your brother that way? She hissed. Jake has had struggles, yes, but at least he's here for us. Not judging us from Chicago and swooping in like some financial savior when it's convenient. I'm here because you asked for my help. I stood up, gathering my financial plans with trembling hands. Because you were about to lose your home. And we're grateful for that. Dad said, his tone suggesting anything but gratitude. But this is still our house. You don't get to dictate how we live. I'm not dictating anything. I'm trying to prevent this exact situation from happening again 6 months from now, when you're behind on payments again. Mom stood up so quickly, her chair fell backward with a crash. Her face was contorted with anger I'd never seen directed at me before. Get out and never come back, she screamed, her voice breaking. If you think we're such lost causes, just go back to your perfect life and leave us alone. The room fell silent, except for Mom's heavy breathing. Dad sat frozen, saying nothing but clearly siding with her. Jake stood by the counter, a smug expression barely concealed beneath fake concern. You don't mean that, I whispered, my voice small and broken. I do, Mom said, her voice now eerily calm. Either accept that this is our home and our decisions, or leave. I looked at my father, hoping for some intervention, some recognition of how irrational this had become. But he just stared at the table, silent in his complicity. I don't remember much about the next hour. Somehow I made it upstairs, packed my suitcase through tears that wouldn't stop falling, and called a taxi. No one came to my room to apologize or ask me to stay. No one helped me carry my luggage down the stairs. No one stood at the door to wave goodbye. As the taxi pulled away, I turned to watch my childhood home disappear through the rear window, wondering how things had gone so catastrophically wrong. The $20,000 I'd given to save that house now felt like the price I'd paid to lose my family. Back at my hotel, I tried calling both my parents repeatedly, but they sent me straight to voicemail. I sent an email with proof of the wire transfer and a final plea for understanding, but received no response. That night, alone in a sterile hotel room 15 miles from the home I was no longer welcome in, I finally allowed myself to completely break down. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Between sobs, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I would stop enabling my family's financial irresponsibility. No more emergency transfers. No more bailouts. No more being the safety net for people who rejected my help while taking my money. The next morning, I changed my flight and returned to Chicago 3 weeks earlier than planned, leaving behind more than just my hometown. I was leaving behind the role I'd played for years: family savior, financial backup plan, reliable daughter who would always come through in a crisis. It was the hardest plane ride of my life. Returning to my Chicago apartment felt surreal, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life. The sleek furniture city view and overall order contrasted sharply with the emotional chaos I'd just left behind. I threw myself into work immediately, taking on extra clients and staying late at the office, anything to avoid the silence of my apartment and the thoughts that came with it. You look terrible, my colleague Naomi commented bluntly after a week of watching me operate on autopilot. And you've lost weight. What happened in Pennsylvania? I'd told everyone I had returned early because the family situation had resolved itself. But Naomi wasn't buying it. After some gentle persistence, I found myself in a coffee shop after work, the whole story pouring out of me between sips of lukewarm latte. "You need to talk to someone professional about this," she said when I finished. "This is beyond normal family drama." She was right. The physical symptoms were undeniable: insomnia, weight loss, difficulty concentrating at work. I'd built my career on helping others make sound financial decisions. Yet I couldn't seem to do the same when it came to my own family. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 days later, I sat across from Dr. Mercer, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. Her office was warm and inviting, with none of the clinical starkness I'd half expected. "Tell me about your relationship with money growing up," she said after I'd given her a condensed version of recent events. The question caught me off guard. I'd expected to talk about my parents' reaction, not my childhood. But as I began to speak about those late nights watching my parents worry at the kitchen table, about the constant underlying anxiety about bills, about the way financial stability had become equated with love and security, in my mind, something shifted. For the first time, I began to see patterns that had been invisible to me before. "It sounds like you became the financial caretaker for your family, at a very young age, at least emotionally," Dr. Mercer observed. "And now that role has expanded to include actual financial support. Is that so wrong, though, helping family?" "Helping isn't wrong, but there's a difference between helping and enabling, and there's certainly a difference between helping and being exploited." The word exploited made me flinch. It seemed too harsh, too accusatory. But over the next few sessions, Dr. Mercer helped me recognize the patterns of financial manipulation that had characterized my family relationships for years. How my brother had learned to weaponize my parents' financial vulnerability against me. How my parents had come to expect bailouts without accountability. "What you're describing has elements of financial abuse," she said during our fourth session. "Not in the traditional sense of someone controlling your money, but in how they use money, or the lack of it, to manipulate your emotions and behavior." The first weekend alone was the hardest. With no work to distract me, the full weight of my family's rejection crashed down. I alternated between rage at their ingratitude and guilt that I hadn't tried harder to understand their perspective. I started journaling, pouring my confused emotions onto paper when they became too overwhelming to contain. Sunday evening, I made a decision I would establish firm financial boundaries with everyone in my life going forward. I drafted a list of personal financial principles that included never lending money I couldn't afford to lose, always getting financial agreements in writing, and requiring transparency from anyone seeking my financial help. 2 weeks after returning to Chicago, still without any contact from my family, I decided to channel my energy into something positive. I signed up to volunteer at a financial literacy program for low-income families. Teaching others how to budget, save, and plan for the future gave me a sense of purpose that my own family situation had stolen from me. It was there I met Michael, another volunteer with a background in accounting. We were paired together to teach a workshop on creating emergency funds, and during our planning session, I found myself sharing bits of my recent experience. My parents remortgaged their house without telling anyone, then nearly lost it. I explained as we discussed how to make the concept of hidden debt relatable to our students. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "My dad did something similar. Took out loans to bail out my sister repeatedly, then expected me to help when he couldn't make the payments. It took me years to realize I wasn't helping by always saying yes." His understanding was like a balm to my raw emotions. Here was someone who didn't judge me for setting boundaries, who understood the complex guilt that came with saying no to family. 3 weeks passed with complete silence from Pennsylvania. No calls, no texts, no emails. I checked social media sparingly, but that's where I saw a photo Jake posted of himself leaning against a brand new Audi. The caption read, "Hard work pays off, #blessed, #entrepreneur, #living the dream." The rage I felt was incandescent. $5,000 of my money meant to save my parents' home, had almost certainly gone toward that car, all while I was being told I was selfish for suggesting a budget. I showed the photo to Dr. Mercer at our next session. "Am I crazy for being this angry?" "Not at all," she said calmly. Your reaction is completely normal given the circumstances. The question is, what are you going to do with that anger? It was a turning point. Instead of letting the anger consume me or drive me to make another desperate attempt at contact, I channeled it into my healing process. I began to see my worth beyond my ability to provide financial support. I recognized the unhealthy dynamic where I'd been valued primarily as a safety net rather than as a daughter and sister. In a symbolic move that felt both painful and liberating, I decided to sell the family heirlooms I had stored in my apartment, my grandmother's china set and some antique jewelry my mother had given me for safekeeping years ago. I didn't need the money, but I needed to sever these physical ties to a family that had rejected me. Thanksgiving arrived, the first family holiday I would spend alone. But I wasn't alone for long. Naomi invited me to her family's celebration, and Michael asked if I wanted to help serve meals at a community center before joining a friend's gathering later. I chose the latter, finding unexpected joy in creating new traditions and connections. By December, I had built what Michael called a chosen family, friends and colleagues who respected my boundaries and valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other through difficulties, and created the kind of safety net that was emotional rather than financial. My phone rang one evening in early December, an unknown number with my hometown's area code. My heart raced as I answered, but I kept my voice neutral. Hello, Ramona. It was my father's voice, sounding older and more tired than I remembered. I almost responded immediately, but something made me pause. Yes, this is Ramona, I said finally, neither warm nor cold. There was a long silence then. We should talk. I ended the call without committing to anything, handshaking as I set the phone down. After everything that had happened, I wasn't ready to rush back into contact without clear boundaries and expectations. When he called again the next day, I let it go to voicemail. I needed more time to process my feelings and decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with my family moving forward. 6 weeks after I'd left Pennsylvania, my father left a voicemail that finally revealed the true nature of their expectations. Ramona, it's Dad. The bank called today about the mortgage payment being late. I thought you were handling that for us now. Call me back as soon as you can. We're worried about losing the house again. I played the message 3 times, unable to believe what I was hearing. After throwing me out of their house after refusing all contact for over a month, they expected me to continue making their mortgage payments. The entitlement was staggering. I consulted with an attorney about the $20,000 I had given them. She was sympathetic but realistic. Without a written agreement, it's legally considered a gift rather than a loan, she explained. You could try to sue for breach of verbal contract, but those cases are difficult to win and expensive to pursue. She helped me draft a formal letter documenting the money transfer and its intended purpose, advising me to keep communication in writing if possible. I also contacted my therapist for guidance on how to handle the emotional aspects of a potential meeting with my parents. Set very clear boundaries before you agree to meet, Dr. Mercer advised. Choose a neutral location, limit the time, and be prepared to leave if the conversation becomes manipulative. After careful consideration, I texted my father suggesting we meet at a cafe halfway between Chicago and my hometown. He agreed immediately, which told me just how desperate their situation must be. I prepared meticulously for the meeting, rehearsing what I would say and anticipating their likely responses. Michael offered to drive me, waiting nearby in case the meeting went poorly. His support gave me the courage I needed to face my father after everything that had happened. The cafe was a generic highway stop, impersonal, and busy enough to discourage dramatic scenes. I arrived 20 minutes early to compose myself, choosing a table near the exit, but away from the main traffic flow. When my father walked in, I was shocked by his appearance. In just 6 weeks, he seemed to have aged years. His shoulders slumped, his face was gaunt, and his eyes held a weariness I'd never seen before. Ramona, he said, his voice catching slightly as he sat down across from me. Dad, I nodded, keeping my voice even. Where's Mom? He looked down at his coffee. She wouldn't come, said it was too humiliating. I nodded, unsurprised, but still hurt. You left me a voicemail about the mortgage. His expression immediately shifted from contrite to annoyed. Yes, we thought you were going to keep helping with that. The bank called again yesterday. You thought I would keep sending money after Mom screamed at me to get out and never come back. I kept my voice low, but couldn't hide my incredulity. That was said in the heat of the moment. He waved dismissively. Family arguments happen all the time. You didn't have to take it so literally and disappear on us. Disappear, I called and texted for days afterward. You all blocked my number. He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Jake thought it would be better if we had some cooling off time. But that doesn't change the fact that we're about to lose the house again. And that's my problem because we're family Ramona. His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. He lowered it again with visible effort. Families help each other. We've always been there for you. I took a sip of water, using the moment to regulate my emotions. I want to be very clear about something. I gave you $20,000 specifically to save the house. You promised to work with me on a budget and repayment plan. Instead, you gave $5,000 of that money to Jake for an investment that apparently turned into a new Audi, refused to discuss a financial plan, and then kicked me out when I expressed concern. Dad's face reddened. That's not exactly how it happened. It's exactly how it happened, I countered calmly. And now you're calling because you want more money, not because you miss your daughter or regret how you treated me. For a long moment he said nothing, staring into his untouched coffee. Jake's gone, he finally admitted. Took the money and disappeared about a week after you left. His phone's disconnected. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. I'm sorry to hear that. Your mother's devastated. First you leave, then Jake. The attempt to guilt me was so transparent I almost laughed. Dad, I didn't leave. I was told to get out and never come back. There's a difference. He ran a hand over his face. Look, we were all upset that day. Things were said that shouldn't have been. But that doesn't change the fact that we need help with the mortgage, just until we get back on our feet. And how exactly are you planning to get back on your feet, the same way you have for the last 20 years? His expression hardened. You think you're so much better than us with your fancy job and your financial knowledge. Not everyone can be perfect like you, Ramona. This isn't about being perfect. It's about basic financial responsibility and honesty. So you'll just let us lose our home after everything we've done for you. His voice had turned bitter. I took a deep breath. I'm willing to help under certain conditions. I pulled out the document my attorney had prepared. First, any money I provide will be a formal loan with a repayment plan that you both sign. Second, you'll need to attend financial counseling regularly. Third, complete transparency about all your finances, including bank statements and credit reports. Dad stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. These are my terms. He stood up abruptly. I don't know who you've become, Ramona, but you're not the daughter we raised. A real daughter wouldn't abandon her parents like this. A real father wouldn't kick his daughter out for trying to help, I replied quietly. The offer stands if you change your mind. He left without another word, the document still lying untouched on the table. I sat there for a long time afterward, feeling oddly calm. For the first time since this ordeal began, I was completely certain I had done the right thing. That certainty was tested 2 days later when the bank called me directly about my parents' account. Apparently, they had listed me as a contact person without my knowledge. Ms. Williams, I'm calling regarding your parents' mortgage situation, the representative began. They mentioned you might be helping them with the payments. I'm sorry, but that's not correct, I replied firmly. I provided a one-time payment to help them catch up, but I am not responsible for their mortgage. I understand. I just wanted to confirm before we proceed with pre-foreclosure notices. After hanging up, I felt a familiar twinge of guilt. Was I really going to let my parents lose their home when I had the means to help them? Then I remembered Dr. Mercer's words about the difference between helping and enabling, and I stood firm in my decision. A week later, my mother showed up unannounced at my apartment in Chicago. How she got my building access code, I'll never know. But suddenly, she was at my door on a Saturday morning looking both defiant and desperate. Mom, I said, genuinely shocked. How did you get here? Bus, she replied shortly. May I come in? I let her in watching as she surveyed my apartment with thinly veiled resentment at the obvious signs of financial stability she clearly felt I was withholding from them. "Your father told me about your conditions," she said, finally perching uncomfortably on the edge of my sofa. "I think they're insulting." "I think they're reasonable given what happened," I countered. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded stiffly. As I prepared the tea, I could feel her eyes on my back assessing calculating. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, she accepted hers with a small nod of thanks. "We're going to lose the house, Ramona," she said bluntly. "Is that what you want?" "Of course not. That's why I offered a structured way to help. That wouldn't just be throwing money at a problem that will keep recurring." "Financial counseling," she scoffed, "like we're children who can't manage our own affairs." "Mom, you nearly lost your house twice in the span of 2 months. That suggests there are serious issues with how you're managing your finances." She stared into her tea. "It's been hard since your father's hours were cut last year, and with Jake needing help after his accident." For the first time, I caught a glimpse of fear beneath her proud exterior. She was terrified of losing her home, of admitting failure, of having to start over in her 60s. "I know it's hard," I said more gently. "That's why I want to help in a way that actually addresses the underlying issues. By humiliating us with contracts and counseling requirements. By setting healthy boundaries that protect everyone involved." I reached for the copy of the terms I'd prepared. "Look, the loan terms are actually very generous. Low interest, flexible payment schedule based on your actual income. The counseling is free through a program at the community center, and the transparency just means we're honest with each other about the real situation." She took the paper reluctantly, scanning it with obvious distaste. "Your father would never agree to this." "That's his choice. But these are my terms." We talked for another hour, circling the same points. She insisted they needed immediate help without strings, while I held firm to my conditions. By the time she left, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted subtly in our interaction. For the first time, I had maintained my boundaries without guilt, and she had, however, reluctantly listened to my perspective. As she left, she turned at the door. "You always were the stubborn one, just like me." It wasn't an apology or an acceptance of my terms, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I'd received in weeks. That night I slept peacefully for the first time since the whole ordeal began, regardless of what decision my parents might ultimately make. 6 months after the explosive confrontation in my parents' kitchen, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. My promotion at work had led to even greater responsibilities as I was selected to head a new division focused on family financial planning, ironically enough. My relationship with Michael had deepened beyond friendship, built on a foundation of mutual respect and, importantly, financial independence. More significantly, I had developed a new relationship with money and with myself. No longer did I measure my worth by my ability to solve others' financial problems. No longer did I feel responsible for financial crises I didn't create. The boundaries I had established initially out of self-preservation had become the framework for healthier relationships in all areas of my life. As for my parents, the path to reconciliation had been neither straight nor easy. After my mother's visit, a month passed with no contact. Then, as foreclosure became imminent, they reluctantly accepted my terms. The bank agreed to a loan modification with my formal guarantee backing it conditional on my parents completing the financial counseling program I had suggested. Those first sessions with the financial counselor were tense. My father sat with arms crossed, participating minimally. My mother answered questions defensively. But gradually, as weeks passed, something began to shift. The counselor, a gentle but firm woman named Diana, had a gift for making financial education feel empowering rather than punitive. "It's not about deprivation," she told them in a session I attended. "It's about aligning your spending with your actual priorities." Slowly, my parents began to implement the budgeting techniques Diana suggested. They started tracking expenses, identifying spending triggers, and making conscious choices rather than reactive ones. It wasn't perfect. Old habits die hard. But it was progress. My contact with them remained limited and structured. We spoke bi-weekly by phone with conversations focused initially on financial matters, but gradually expanding to include other topics. I visited once staying at a hotel rather than their home, maintaining the emotional distance I needed to protect myself. Jake reappeared about 4 months after vanishing the Audi gone his entrepreneurial dreams shattered. He called my parents asking for money to pay rent on a new apartment. To my surprise, they declined. "We can't help you financially right now," my mother told him, according to what she later shared with me. "But we can help you look for jobs, or you can stay in the guest room while you get back on your feet if you contribute to household expenses." When Jake tried to contact me directly, I was prepared. "I'm not giving you money," I told him plainly. "But if you're serious about changing your financial habits, I can point you toward resources." He hung up on me and didn't call back. I heard through my parents that he eventually found a job at a warehouse and was sharing an apartment with friends. Whether he was genuinely changing or just finding new sources of support, I couldn't say, but I no longer felt responsible for his choices. The most significant development in my own life was the financial education program I created, specifically addressing family financial dynamics. Drawing from my personal experience and professional knowledge, I designed workshops that helped people identify unhealthy financial relationships and establish appropriate boundaries. Money is never just about money, I would tell participants. It's about power, love, security, and self-worth. Until we recognize those emotional connections, we can't make truly healthy financial decisions. The program gained popularity quickly, eventually being adopted by several community organizations and even featured in a national financial magazine. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family's financial crisis had led to a career opportunity that allowed me to help others avoid similar pain. Therapy continued to be an essential part of my healing process. Dr. Mercer helped me recognize the generational patterns of financial dependency in my family and understand how they had shaped my own relationship with money. "Your grandfather bailed out your father expected the same from you, and without intervention, the pattern would continue," she pointed out. "By breaking that cycle, you're not just helping yourself, but potentially future generations too." My parents' progress was slow and imperfect. There were setbacks, a credit card they didn't initially disclose an impulse purchase that derailed their budget 1 month. But unlike before, these issues were addressed openly rather than hidden. The refinancing I helped them secure reduced their monthly mortgage payment to a manageable level. And for the first time in decades, they began building a modest emergency fund. The most meaningful breakthrough came during a family dinner 6 months after our reconciliation began. My father, never one for emotional conversations, cleared his throat awkwardly as we finished dessert. "I owe you an apology, Ramona," he said, staring at his coffee cup. "What we did, taking your money, lying about the second mortgage, kicking you out, it was wrong. I was ashamed of our financial mistakes and took it out on you because you represented everything I had failed to achieve." The words weren't elegant, but they were sincere, and they meant more to me than the repayment plan they had faithfully maintained for the past few months. My mother's reconciliation took a different form. She never explicitly apologized for her harsh words, but her actions showed a grudging respect for the boundaries I had established. She began asking my advice on financial decisions, actually listening to my responses, and even recommended my financial workshops to friends facing similar challenges. During the holidays that year, we attempted a new tradition, a family dinner that included both my biological family and members of my chosen family. Michael came, as did Naomi and her husband. The conversation was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but ultimately more authentic than our interactions had been in years. Looking at the mixed group around the table, my parents trying their best to be gracious hosts, Jake notably absent by mutual agreement, my friends offering warm support with their presence, I realized that family, like financial security, isn't something that just happens. Both require intentional effort, clear boundaries, and ongoing maintenance. That evening, as Michael and I drove back to Chicago, he asked what I was thinking about. "I'm thinking about the difference between helping and enabling," I replied. For years, I thought love meant fixing every problem, being the safety net that never failed. But real love means respecting people enough to let them face the consequences of their choices while still being there to support their growth. He nodded, understanding, without needing more explanation. "So what's next for you and your family?" "Honest answers only." I smiled. I don't know. We're all still learning how to relate to each other as the people we actually are, not the roles we've played for so long. It's messy and uncomfortable sometimes, but it feels real in a way our relationship never did before. The journey of healing my relationship with my family continues to unfold, with progress and setbacks along the way. Some days I still struggle with guilt about maintaining boundaries. Other days I feel anger resurface when I remember how they treated me. But most days I feel a quiet pride in the difficult but necessary work we're all doing to build healthier relationships. The greatest lesson I've learned through this painful experience is that true financial freedom isn't just about having enough money. It's about breaking free from the emotional patterns that drive unhealthy financial behaviors. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't measured by your ability to rescue others, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and allow people to face their own challenges. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members over financial matters? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, creating healthy financial boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone involved. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own journey toward financial and emotional freedom.